Hey everyone, David Ryshpan here with you for another YouTube tutorial. Today we are going to talk about creating your own funk keyboard parts. If you enjoy the content on this channel, please like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so that you get a reminder every time I post new content on this channel. Please follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and if you are feeling particularly generous, you can go over to Patreon and donate to get the PDFs and other exclusive content to support this channel. Now let's get to it. We're going to talk about creating your own funk keyboard parts today. We've looked at copying and learning other people's parts, but we haven't really talked about creating our own. It kind of comes from the same philosophy, the same set of listening skills. It's just instead of learning other people's parts, we're going to take what we've learned from other people's parts and apply them to our own process of creation. The bass line is adapted from a lesson by the great Toronto bass player Rich Brown that is available on Scott's Bass Lessons. It is a vital lesson for all musicians, not just bass players, on rhythmic displacement and rhythmic variations. Rich is one of my favorite musicians on the planet, and definitely go check him out and check the lesson out if you haven't done so already. I'll link to it in the cards and in the description box below. So the bass line that we're working with is adapted from that lesson. And I knew in working on the track that I was going to play clavinet first, and in my head, in this particular style of funk, the clavinet is very much linked to the bass line, the same way certain guitar parts in other funk bands are linked to the bass line, the way average white band guitars or the Meters Leo Nocentelli would often double George Porter. So that was my conception of the clavinet part. So I'm doubling the bass line. I should mention I have a wah-wah on the expression pedal, which I'm kind of leaving fixed. I'm not doing a huge sweep of the wah. And I'm basically just doubling the bass line. I'm hitting beat 2 before the rest of the bass line continues. So in between the bass line, I'm playing just a simple chord stab, which in the key of G minor is A, B flat, and D. And I'm just hitting it as a stab, so 9-3-5, on beat 2 before the rest of the bass line. And I have my wah kind of fixed in the middle. I'm keeping it mostly fixed and doing sort of micro shifts on the wah. I'm not doing a big sweep there. So here's the clavinet part in isolation. next part I added was the Rhodes. And once the first part is down, every other part I add is about staying out of the way. The clavinet's already doing a certain job, a certain role. I don't need to step on it or double it again in my Rhodes part because the clavinet part's already doubling the bass. So we don't need to triple the bass line. There's a certain point where doubling adds strength and then tripling actually kind of makes it weaker. So my concept for the Rhodes part, also because the Rhodes is a more sustaining instrument generally than a clavinet, my concept was to find a counterpoint, a counter rhythm to what was going on in the clavinet part. And I came upon this figure, 1, 2, 3. Which kind of sits in the gap of the clavinet part. And then I would just hold long sustained voicings over the top of that figure. And here's the Rhodes part in isolation. The last thing I added was the B3 part, the organ part, and now that we've got two parts, trying to slot in a third is the most difficult thing, and I definitely relied on the strength of what Hammond organs do and what only Hammond organs can do, which is their volume swells because they're linked to the volume pedal, the expression pedal, and the shifting dynamics and colors that you can get by pulling drawbars. So the first thing I do is just a basic swell on a single high G, and I have a lot of the high drawbars out, and I'm basically coming up from nothing on the volume pedal in and then bringing it back out with the Leslie going fast. So that's kind of fading in. The rest of the organ part also relies on the fact that a real Hammond organ has two keyboards or two manuals. And in this case, I've got my Nord set up in a split to emulate the two manuals. I have one sound down here, and I have another sound up here. And I'm basically going back and forth between them. My left hand is doubling the Rhodes part, and then my right hand is playing interjections and fills around the rest of the band. Here's the organ part in isolation. So the same things I've talked about in other videos about hearing different parts and then possibly consolidating them apply here as well. A lot of my listening has been to bands with either multiple keyboard players or a single keyboard player who will overdub a lot of parts and move between a lot of instruments. John Medeski was a very large influence on me growing up. Those early Medeski, Martin and Wood records, and seeing him live and how he basically has complete independence over the instruments he's playing at any given time. From there, I got into Billy Preston and Art Neville, all keyboard players who play multiple instruments and who have a strong conception of their sounds on each instrument and how to link the parts together if they're playing live and how to overlay the parts if they're recording. And then obviously Stevie Wonder is the master of keyboard orchestration. If you watch certain neo-soul and pop bands, live bands, when they play live, they have multiple keyboard players. If you do the research, you can find articles about people on big tours and how they divide the parts between multiple keyboard players. That gave me a lot of insight into how to approach playing in multiple keyboard bands and how to think about my own parts in overdubbing in the studio. If I had to consolidate all of these parts, I would probably either just play clavinet or just play Rhodes, depending on what vibe I was going for. It would be one of those two instruments. In either case, the concept is the same. I would play the bass line in my left hand, and I would add more fills and that second counter rhythm in my right hand. So we've been talking about vintage funk, old school funk, the Meters, Average White Band, James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, that kind of vibe. These days, I find funk often signifies what I would probably call boogie, or Dayton funk, Minneapolis funk, synth-driven funk. How can we apply these same concepts to that sonic era? Well,